Section 3 of Chapter 2 is going to be the chapter that the majority of your test is going to be on. It's dealing with carbon compounds. Now, carbon has 4 valence electrons and is the most versatile element. Carbon can form bonds with itself that are either single, double, or triple bonds. So if we look at these different compounds down at the bottom, we see the first one, methane, where it's formed 4 bonds with 4 individual hydrogens. Hydrogen can only form 1 bond. Right, so it makes it an ideal bonding partner. So right here we have methane with 1 carbon in the center bonded to 4 hydrogens. Now next to it, notice we have carbon triple bonded to itself. Okay, carbon forms 4 bonds. Now it's got 1 bond with the hydrogen, 3 bonds with another carbon, right? And then if we see the butadiene, we notice that the carbons have what we call double bonds. All right, see that carbon right all the way to the left has bonded with 2 hydrogens, and it has 2 bonds with itself. Now these double bonds are going to come into importance when we start talking about saturated and unsaturated fats. Macromolecules are large molecules. They are formed in a process known as polymerization, in which large compounds are formed by combining smaller particles. So you take small particles, combine them together, and form a large particle. Now we see right here monomers are the smaller single unit and the polymer is the larger unit. So notice all of these pieces right here are going to be the monomers. They come together from the polymer. So this is polymerization, right? The creation of a polymer. And we're going to deal with this in all the organic compounds we talk about, polymerization to form the polymer. Now there are 4 groups of organic compounds found in living things. We have carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. We're going to talk about them all in depth except for nucleic acids. We'll mention them and we'll have a few little things for you to know about them. But nucleic acids are for the most part going to be saved for when we do DNA and RNA. Now carbohydrates, they're very important. This is going to be a big part of your test and it always comes up on the regions. They are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. All right, make sure you know that. Carbohydrates are the main source of energy in living things. We just talked about respiration in Chapter 1 being the process that is used to create energy. Carbohydrates are the input to the creation of that energy. Now, monosaccharides are going to be single sugar molecules, glucose, galactose, fructose. Notice they all end in ose. Okay? We are going to have all carbohydrates there, all the sugars, end in ose. Even if we get to cellulose, maltose, we get into the polysaccharides, they are going to end in ose. Now polysaccharides, they would be the polymer. Notice we're using those prefixes mono, monomer, single, sugars, poly, polysaccharides, multiple sugars. Okay, we're using those prefixes again and again and again. So our polysaccharides are going to be large molecules formed from monosaccharides. Glycogen, right, is used when glucose stores are low. That's a polysaccharide. Cellulose, a structural unit in plants. Those are going to be polysaccharides. Now if we look right here, this image is going to be very important for you to know. It is a glucose molecule. So that image is going to end up on your test. There will be a question, what is this? And it'll show that and you'll have to know it's a glucose. But notice how a chain of them forms a starch, polysaccharide. Okay? So that's what we're going to refer to as a starch. Now lipids are going to be the second organic compound we're going to talk about, and they are formed with mainly carbon and hydrogen. Now you see that there are a few oxygens in there, but the majority of it is a carbon backbone with hydrogens coming off it. Now lipids can be used to store energy and can be important parts of biological membranes. Now if we take a look right here, we see a glycerol on the left side highlighted in yellow and 3 fatty acids come together to form that lipid. Okay? Now notice in the center those double bonds. This would be an unsaturated fat. Saturated fats are going to have no double bonds and they are going to have as many hydrogens as possible. Okay? Now this is a picture of a cell membrane. Now notice the yellows are called phospholipids. Those are part of a cell membrane. Notice it's a double layer lipid membrane. Okay, so those phospholipids come together. And we'll talk about that more in cell membranes, but we're just showing here that this lipid layer is used in cells on their outside in their cell membrane. Now remember, we talked about that water is a polar molecule. Lipids are non-polar, so water is not going to be able to dissolve them. So they're going to be waterproof. That cell membrane is waterproof. Now nucleic acids are macromolecules containing hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. We're containing all 5 right here. Nucleotides are polymers assembled from individual monomers, and they store and transmit hereditary information or genetic information. Now basically what you're going to need to know for now about nucleic acids is that what elements make them up, and that the 2 types are DNA and RNA. Okay. Here are some examples of the individual bases used in DNA, and we'll go over this much more in DNA and RNA, but notice that the 2 purines, the larger ones, a purine pairs with a pyrimidine. So adenine pairs with thymine, cytosine with guanine, but that's not going to be on your test, so don't worry about that for now. You will need to know it for the test after the midterm. And again, here they are in a more structural setting. Here is a picture of DNA and RNA overall. There is a sugar molecule to the right, that pentagon is a sugar molecule. Notice the difference here is that on the bottom right-hand corner of each, the ribonucleic acid has an oxygen, the deoxyribonucleic does not. Right? And that's why it's deoxy. Right? And that's one of the differences. And we'll get into those more in chapters 12 and 13. Proteins are macromolecules. They contain nitrogen as well as carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Protein is the polymer. The monomer would be an amino acid. So a chain of amino acids is a protein. Now there are 20 different amino acids, and the arrangement of them determines which protein you have created. So back to our cell membrane here, we notice that these green pieces are an amino acid chain. Those are called transmembrane proteins, and those are going to be used for transport. Now what we have here is amino acids are compounds with an amino group and a carboxyl group. So the amino group here is in blue, the carboxyl group is in green, there's a hydrogen, and notice we have a variant group coming off that central carbon as well. That variant group could contain sulfur or mainly just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sometimes nitrogen. All right, they're going to contain a bunch of different elements there, and those variant groups are going to be what determines the 20 different amino acids. Now, some proteins control the rate of reaction and regulate cell processes, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. They are called enzymes. Some proteins are used to form bones and muscles, while others are going to transport substances into and out of the cells, and they can help to fight disease. We just saw the transmembrane proteins for transport. Now, peptide bonds are going to hold them together, and they are going to be known as a polypeptide. Okay, so since they're held together, the different amino acids will be held together. The carboxyl end of the first one will attach to the amino end of the second one, and we are creating our polypeptide.